I never thought I'd see something like that in my lifetime. The water around my old wooden boat was calm, silent, broken only by the soft splash of my oars. I was in the middle of the lake, just after sunrise, the mist still hanging low. That was when I noticed movement on the small rocky island a few dozen yards ahead. At first I thought it was just driftwood or a bird, but then I saw two tiny shapes stumble forward, followed by a larger one. My heart stopped. It was a snow leopard, thin, weak, her ribs showing. And she wasn't alone. Two small cubs clung to her sides. I froze, the oars halfway out of the water. My first thought was that my mind was playing tricks on me. Snow leopards didn't belong here. They lived high in the mountains, far from this place. What was she doing in the middle of a lake, stranded on a barren island with no food in sight? My chest tightened as the cubs let out faint cries, so thin it was more a whimper than a roar. I couldn't move. Fear gripped me as much as shock. She looked up, her pale eyes locking onto me, and I felt as though the air had been ripped out of my lungs. My instinct screamed at me to row back to shore, to put as much distance as possible between myself and those piercing eyes. A wild predator, even starved, was still dangerous. If she leapt into the water and somehow reached me, I wouldn't stand a chance. I glanced around, as if anyone else could confirm what I was seeing. But I was alone. Just me, the still lake, and this impossible scene. I gripped the worn handle of the oar tighter, my palms sweaty. The boat rocked gently as I tried to steady my breathing. The mother leopard staggered forward a few steps, then sat heavily on the rock, exhausted. The cubs climbed over her, pawing at her belly, looking for milk that might not even be there anymore. The sight hit me harder than fear. It was raw desperation. I muttered under my breath, asking myself what in the world I was supposed to do. Every instinct battled against each other. Get out of here now before she decides you're the enemy. But another thought burned stronger. They won't survive long like this. The island was bare, just sharp rocks and a patch of moss. No prey, no shelter, just hunger. The minutes stretched on, each one louder in my head. My boat drifted closer with the current. The distance between us shrank, and I knew I had to choose. The leopard didn't move. Her head was low, her eyes still fixed on me. She didn't growl, didn't lunge, just stared, as if weighing me the same way I was weighing her. I reached for the basket of fish at my feet, my catch from the early morning. The smell of it suddenly felt sharp, dangerous. Would throwing food make things worse? Would it lure her closer, push her to attack? I sat frozen, clutching the slippery scales of a trout, my thoughts racing. The cubs stumbled again, one of them tripping over a rock and crying out. That small, helpless sound pierced deeper than any roar could. My throat tightened. I thought of my own kids back home, how they cried when they were hungry, how helpless they looked. I blinked hard, trying to shut the image out, but it was too late. The line between them and these cubs blurred in my head. I whispered to myself, what if I just row away? No one would ever know. I could go back to shore, pretend I never saw them. But the moment the thought formed, it felt like a betrayal. My grip on the fish tightened, and I realized I was shaking. The boat rocked again, the sound of water slapping against the hull breaking the silence. The leopard's ears twitched. She shifted her weight, slow, unsteady, as if she might collapse any moment. Her cubs pressed against her side, waiting. My chest pounded so hard it hurt. This wasn't supposed to happen to me. I came to fish, not to make life or death choices. The wind picked up, carrying her scent faintly across the water, wild, musky, sharp. It made everything too real. I wiped sweat from my brow, my eyes never leaving hers. In that moment, time felt like it had stopped, the world narrowing to just me and her. The oar slipped slightly in my hand. I tightened my grip again, torn between two paths that could change everything. Do I turn back now, row hard for shore, and leave them to their fate? Or do I move closer, risking everything, stepping into something I couldn't control? The choice pressed down on me with unbearable weight. And as the mist slowly began to lift from the water, the answer didn't come any easier. I just sat there, caught in the silence, on the edge of a decision that could define everything that came after. The silence was unbearable. I felt like if I sat there any longer, I'd drown in it. My hands trembled as I gripped the oars again. Against every ounce of common sense, I rowed forward. The boat cut through the water with slow, deliberate strokes. Each sound of wood scraping against water felt like a warning. The island crept closer, and so did those pale eyes fixed on me. The leopard stirred. Her ears twitched, and her body stiffened as I reduced the distance. A low growl rumbled from her chest, weak but sharp enough to freeze my blood. My instinct screamed at me to back away, but I didn't. I needed to see them closer. The cubs clung to her, one trying to hide behind her tail. Their fur was patchy, their bellies small and hollow. They looked like hunger itself. I whispered under my breath, trying to steady myself. I told myself she was too weak to swim, too exhausted to strike, but those words felt like lies. A predator is always a predator. She bared her teeth slightly, her head low, her body swaying as if she didn't even have the strength to stand. It was a strange mix of menace and fragility. She wanted me gone, but she couldn't force me away. My boat bumped lightly against a rock at the edge of the island. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the still air. The leopard snarled, her voice cracking halfway through, and I flinched so hard I nearly dropped the oar. My breath came shallow and fast. I fumbled with the basket at my feet, pulling out the trout I'd been gripping since the start. The slippery body of the fish wiggled in my hand, as if it too wanted to escape. I leaned forward, arms shaking, and tossed it onto the rock a few feet from her. The fish slapped against the stone, the sound sharp and wet. For a second, nothing happened. She just stared at me, her breath ragged, her chest rising and falling. Then her cubs crept forward, curious but hesitant. She gave a weak growl, a warning to them, but hunger overruled fear. One cub sniffed the trout and pawed at it clumsily. Her head lifted slightly, and for a brief moment, I thought she would lunge at me. Instead, she lowered her face to the fish and bit into it, the sound of tearing flesh loud enough for me to hear from where I sat. My shoulders sagged in a release I hadn't realized I was holding. I wasn't dead. Not yet. But before I could process the strange relief, a voice behind me sliced through the air. "What the hell are you doing out here?" I turned, startled, and saw another boat gliding out of the mist. It was Thomas, a local fisherman I knew from the village. His face was hard, his voice sharper. "Are you out of your mind? That's a wild cat. Get away from there before it kills you." I held up my hand, signaling him to keep his voice down. But he rowed closer, his oars thrashing the water like he was in a hurry to pull me back from the edge of death. He shook his head, his voice rising. "You don't understand. If you feed it, it will keep coming back. It'll leave that island and head for the village. Do you want children torn apart because of your pity?" His words slammed into me. The image of torn children clashed with the sight before me. Two cubs gnawing desperately on fish while their mother barely lifted her head. My stomach twisted. He wasn't wrong. A snow leopard that associated people with food could become a danger. But leaving them here meant death anyway. I tried to reason, my voice low, tense. "Look at them, Tom. They're starving. They won't make it another day." He spat into the water, his face flushed with anger. "That's not our problem. That's nature. If you interfere, you'll bring their fight into our homes." The cubs whimpered again, and the sound cut through the argument like a blade. I felt caught between two worlds, one where I saved them, another where I condemned them. Tom's boat bumped against mine, rocking me. His hand shot out, gripping my shoulder hard. His eyes were furious. "Row back. Now." I yanked my shoulder free, my pulse hammering. I shook my head, my voice breaking with frustration. "I can't just leave them like this." He glared at me, his jaw tight, the silence between us heavier than the mist that still clung to the lake. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Behind me, the leopard lifted her head again. Her eyes burned into mine, and I felt a strange pull I couldn't explain. Maybe it was madness, maybe it was mercy, but I knew my decision was already made. I shoved Tom's boat away with the end of my oar, my voice steady even though my hands shook. "Go back if you want. I'm not leaving them." His mouth opened, his face twisted in fury, but I turned away before he could answer. My focus was back on the island, on the fragile family clinging to life before me. The line was drawn, and I'd crossed it. There was no turning back now. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those cubs tearing at the fish, their tiny jaws clumsy but desperate. I heard their whimpers, the low growl of their mother, the fury in Tom's voice. By dawn, I knew I couldn't just sit at home pretending it hadn't happened. So I loaded my boat again, filled my basket with fish, and pushed back onto the lake. The water was calm, reflecting the pale sky. My strokes were steady, but my stomach twisted with nerves. What if Tom had told the others? What if someone was waiting for me on the shore? I shook the thought away. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this for the 3 lives stranded on that rock. When I reached the island, the sight nearly broke me. The cubs were curled against their mother, their fur damp with dew, their bodies trembling. She raised her head slowly when she heard my oars. Her growl was weaker than yesterday, but it was still there, a thread of defiance holding her together. I pulled out 2 fish, tossing them closer this time. The cubs pounced, their tiny claws scratching the stone as they tore into the meal. The mother leaned forward too, her teeth ripping through flesh with more strength than I expected. Watching them eat, something in me loosened, like a knot I hadn't realized was strangling my chest. But the peace didn't last. By the time I rowed back to shore, 2 men were waiting near the dock. I recognized them immediately, Thomas and David, both older fishermen from the village. Tom's face was as red as the morning sun, his voice already raised before I even tied up the boat. "What the hell do you think you're doing? You're feeding killers." David shook his head, calmer but still firm. "If you keep this up, those cats will follow the smell of people. They'll come near the houses. You'll bring danger right to our doors." I felt my throat tighten as they closed in. I tried to explain, my voice unsteady. "They're starving. They won't survive without help." Tom cut me off with a sharp laugh, bitter and angry. "Then let nature decide. It's not your job to play God out there." His words stung, but my mind replayed the image of the cubs clawing at the fish. I couldn't let them die like that. David stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We've got children in this village. Families. What happens if that mother decides to come looking for more food? Do you want blood on your hands?" The weight of his words pressed hard, but I couldn't back down. I shook my head, forcing the words out. "They're not a threat now. They just need time. If they get strong enough, they'll leave." Tom spat at the ground. "Or they'll come for us." The argument ended with silence, heavy and bitter. They turned away, muttering under their breath, and I was left standing by my boat, guilt clawing at me from both sides. Was I saving them, or damning us all? The following day, I went back anyway. My chest was tight the whole time, but when I reached the island, the reaction was different. The cubs didn't shrink back immediately. They looked up at me, then at the fish I tossed, and rushed forward without hesitation. Even the mother's growl sounded weaker, less like a threat, more like a warning she didn't have the strength to enforce. For the first time, I felt a thin thread of trust forming between us. I sat in the boat, watching them eat, my oars resting still. The cubs stumbled over each other, one swatting the other with a tiny paw as they tore at the fish. For a few moments, I allowed myself to believe this could work. That maybe, just maybe, I could keep them alive until they were strong enough to move on. Then the air split with a sound that froze me to the bone. A sharp cry, shrill and violent, echoed across the water. The mother leopard's head shot up, her ears forward, her body stiff. The cubs froze, their tiny bodies pressed low to the stone. I gripped the oar, scanning the tree line on the far shore. The sound came again, closer this time. A guttural roar, deeper, heavier. My stomach dropped. It wasn't another leopard. It was a bear. I caught sight of it breaking through the brush at the water's edge, its massive body lumbering toward the shoreline, nose lifted, sniffing the air. It had caught the scent of fish, or worse, of weakness. The leopard snarled, forcing herself upright despite her exhaustion. She pushed her cubs behind her, her body trembling but defiant. My boat rocked as I leaned forward, heart pounding in my ears. The bear's growl carried over the lake, low and thunderous. It stepped into the shallows, water churning around its legs, eyes locked on the island. My breath caught. The fragile balance I had tried to build shattered in an instant. This wasn't just hunger anymore. This was survival, and I was trapped in the middle of it. The bear's roar echoed so loud across the lake that my chest vibrated with it. The mother leopard crouched low, her thin body trembling as she pushed her cubs behind her. The cubs whimpered, pressing their small bodies into the rocks. The bear stepped further into the water, its massive shoulders rippling, its eyes locked on the island. It smelled the fish, it smelled the weakness, and it wanted what was there. My boat drifted closer to the island as I gripped the oar. My mind screamed at me to row away, to save myself, but my body wouldn't move. I watched as the leopard forced herself upright, her tail lashing the ground. She let out a raw, broken snarl. It was the sound of a mother with nothing left to give, but everything still to fight for. The bear sloshed deeper, water rising to its chest. I felt the air in my lungs tighten. If it reached the island, the leopard and her cubs didn't stand a chance. They were too weak. This was no fight. It would be a slaughter. Something in me snapped. Before I could think it through, I shoved the oar hard, driving the boat between the island and the bear. My heart pounded so violently I thought it might burst. The bear froze, staring at me with dark, burning eyes. My hands shook as I grabbed another fish from the basket and hurled it far across the water, away from the island. The fish slapped into the surface, sending ripples across the lake. For a moment, the world held still. Then the bear turned its head, sniffed the air, and lumbered toward the splash. Relief hit me so hard I almost collapsed. My chest heaved, sweat pouring down my back. The leopard hadn't moved, but her eyes stayed on me, unblinking. I rowed the boat to the edge of the island, close enough to hear the cubs' faint whines. My voice cracked as I whispered, "It's okay. It's okay now." I had no idea who I was trying to convince, her or myself. Slowly, carefully, I leaned over the edge and tossed another fish just a foot from the cubs. One of them darted forward, snatching it up before scurrying back against its mother. The other followed, their small tails flicking nervously. The mother leopard shifted, her body sagging as if the standoff with the bear had drained what little strength she had left. She looked at me again, but this time, the growl didn't come. Her chest rose and fell, and for one insane moment, I thought she might let me touch her. My hand hovered over the edge of the boat, trembling, so close I could see the frost-white whiskers on her muzzle. But just before I could move closer, her head dropped onto the stone, exhausted. My breath rushed out in a shaky sigh. We were at the edge of something fragile, something dangerous, but real. A line of trust that could vanish with one wrong move. A sharp voice broke through the fragile silence. "Hey, step back." I twisted around to see two more boats cutting across the water. Thomas was in one, his face set in rage, and beside him were two other men from the village. Their oars slapped the lake hard, their eyes fixed on me and the animals. I felt dread crawl up my spine. Tom's voice carried across the water. "We warned you. Now you've brought them closer to us all. We're ending this." His words were filled with finality, with something that made my stomach churn. One of the men in the second boat held a rifle, the barrel glinting in the sunlight. Panic gripped me. I rowed closer to the island, placing myself between them and the leopard. My voice cracked as I shouted back, "Don't. They're starving. They're no threat if we just let them be." Tom's jaw clenched, his knuckles white on the oar. "You think you're saving them? You're signing our death warrants." The cubs whimpered again, pressing into their mother. My heart ached at the sight. I could feel the weight of every eye on me, human and animal alike. The mother leopard's gaze stayed fixed, a flicker of something in it I couldn't name. Fear, exhaustion, maybe even the faintest sliver of trust. I was caught between worlds. Behind me, my own people demanded action. In front of me, a fragile family clung to survival. The man with the rifle raised it, the sound of metal clicking sharp in the still air. My chest tightened so hard I thought I'd suffocate. I knew if they fired, the trust I'd just earned would shatter forever, and blood would soak the rocks of that island. I gripped the side of the boat, torn apart by a choice I never thought I'd face. Do I step aside and let them end it, betraying the silent bond one had just begun to build with her? Or do I stand against my own, risk everything, and protect a family that wasn't mine to protect? The weight of it crushed me as the rifle steadied. The cubs whimpered again, and the leopard's eyes held mine like she was asking me the same question. The rifle was aimed, steady, the men's faces hard with determination. My body shook, but I rowed closer to the island, planting myself between them and the leopard. My voice cracked as I shouted, "You'll have to go through me first." For a heartbeat, silence held. The only sounds were the water lapping against the boats and the faint cries of the cubs. The man with the gun hesitated, his eyes narrowing. Tom barked at him, "Do it. End this before it spreads." My chest pounded as I spread my arms wide, my oar clutched like a shield. Everything in me screamed that I couldn't let them pull the trigger. Not after all this. Not after the trust that had started to grow. And then, before anyone could move, the mother leopard rose. She staggered to her feet, her body weak but her presence commanding. She didn't lunge, didn't snarl. Instead, she nudged her cubs forward, her head high. With trembling steps, she guided them to the water's edge. My breath caught as I realized what she was about to do. The cubs slid into the lake first, paddling awkwardly but determined. The mother followed, her movements slow, every stroke costing her strength. But she kept going, pushing them across the water, away from the island, away from us. The rifles lowered, the men frozen in shock. None of us moved, watching as the fragile family made their way toward the far shore. My throat burned as I whispered, "She's leaving. She's choosing for herself." The weight in my chest eased, though it didn't vanish. I knew this wasn't a victory, not really. It was something harder, something that didn't come with clear answers. When they finally disappeared into the trees, I sat there in silence, my arms trembling, my heart hollow and full all at once. I didn't know if I had saved them or simply delayed the inevitable. But I knew this: she had made her choice. And maybe that was enough.